Okay, well, good morning everyone. Good morning Queensland. Happy International Women's Day to all the women out there. Now, we're here in Goodna today and big job, a huge job ahead of us and a huge job to rebuild people's lives that have been severely impacted by the extreme weather event that Queenslanders have never seen before, especially in the southeast. So today we're in Goodna. Ipswich alone has had some 560 homes and businesses that have been inundated. We still have 40 people in the evacuation centre here, and as you can see, I know all the media coming out here, there is a big impact in this region, and it's absolutely overwhelming to see people's lives basically on the streets. Well, the good news is the Army's here to help, and it's great to be joined by Federal Minister Peter Dutton today, local federal member Milton Dick, local councillor Paul Tully, my local member Lance, and of course our new recovery coordinator, and the Deputy Premier, and we also know how important the recovery is to the southeast, especially from that whole Fraser Coast area all the way down to the border. And I'm quite sure we also send our thoughts as well to people south of the border as well. Huge impacts down there as well. So we're really feeling for everyone during this time. But today I'm very pleased to announce that Major General Jake Elwood will be Queensland's Flood Recovery Coordinator. Now, Jake is no stranger to Queensland, having served at some of the highest ranks in Queensland and federally, and he had no hesitation when we asked him to do this job, and it is absolutely a huge job. We spent the afternoon, the Deputy Premier and I spent the afternoon with him yesterday going through the sheer impact across the southeast. And today we're going to be looking at some impacted areas. So of course people's homes here, then we'll be heading off to look at some of the schools that have been impacted, and of course, you know, you only have to look at the impact on the ferry terminals as well. So it's going to take a lot to rebuild, but our focus fundamentally is on people, and then of course it's the infrastructure and people's livelihoods in terms of businesses as well. So look, I'll get the Federal Minister Peter Dutton to say a few words, then you'll hear from Major General Jake Elwood about the sheer job that he has ahead of him, and I sincerely thank him for coming to Queensland's aid during this time. And can I say a big thank you to all of the Army personnel that are here. I remember when I was up in Gympie the other day, and you know, the business owners said to me and the community members said, look down there across the park, the Army's arrived. And I think it's just going to be so inspiring to the families across the southeast to see the Army helping out. And we want to thank the federal government for that as well. And it's great to see all levels of government working together. I always say we work best when we work together. I always apply that mantra in things that I do, and it's great to see that's happening now for the recovery. So I'll hand over to Peter, and then you'll hear from Major General.
Thanks. Premier, thank you very much. Well, to you and to the Deputy Premier, to Milton and Paul and everybody here, thank you very much for the way in which we've been able to coordinate and respond at a time of greatest need. We were just talking before about some of the houses in Mill Street here in Goodna, which had been completely inundated. Devastation in the worst hour in the lives of those people. So the fact that we've been able to work together, and the presence of the Australian Defence Force here, men and women in uniform, going door to door, helping those families recover from that dreadful situation, that's really what we acknowledge today, and say thank you to all of those that are in uniform, both here and right across different parts of the country. We're watching this event unfold closer to Sydney now as it moves down the east coast. But here on the ground, this has been one of the worst affected areas, and we have had a consistent rapport with the local community here, identifying their priorities, how we can help them, and that's the leadership that's provided from the Australian Defence Force, working in concert with the state government and the local authorities. I'm very pleased that that Jake Elwood, Major General Elwood, is going to be appointed to this position because he has 30 years worth of service to our country. He served overseas in Kosovo, where he was recognised with a special recognition there from the British forces. He has served in Iraq, where he received the Distinguished Service Cross. He has led the men and women of the Australian Defence Force during his entire 3-decade career. He's been an inspiration to many people that have worked under him, and I think he is a fantastic appointment. And in my discussions with the Chief of the Defence Force, there was really no other person that we could identify that was more worthy than Jake to take up this position, and I'm very pleased that the Premier's made the decision to appoint somebody of the calibre of Jake Elwood, and he will provide that coordination and that assistance to help Queenslanders get back on their feet as quickly as possible, and that's exactly what we want. So I'm very proud to be here in his presence today, and very proud just to have been speaking with some of the ADF personnel about their own experiences, and we acknowledge the fact that they're away from their own families for an extended period now until we get this job done. They're wonderful Australians, and I'm very grateful for the sacrifice and the service that they provide to our local community. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Premier. Look, it is a tough time for Queenslanders, and for some this comes on the back of a number of other disasters, and so my heart goes out to the community. You watch the news and you can see the hurt in people's eyes. The thing that is, I guess, uplifting is that you also see members of the community leaders out supporting those who are affected. You see government organisations, Queensland Reconstruction Authority, Emergency Management Services, Australian Defence Force, all out there supporting one another. And during the fires, I must say, I did feel that you see the very best of Australians at the worst of times, and I think looking around we see that here. So for me now, straight after this, what I want to do is get out on the ground and to talk to people, to understand the issues, to understand the environment, so that we can make sure that we're prioritising things correctly, because that is important. Now it's a big job, and there's going to be a lot that will have to be done. There are going to be hurdles, there will be obstacles, but together we will overcome it, and I commit to you that I will do my very best in this appointment. So thank you very much.
Deputy Premier.
Thanks, Premier. We've now completed more than 15,000 damage assessments on properties. 2,430 of them were found to have moderate damage, 1,778 to have severe damage. And so clearly the clean-up continues. I'd like to very much welcome the appointment of Major General Jake Elwood as our flood disaster recovery coordinator. He will do a fantastic job at working with our Queensland Reconstruction Authority. The fact is, our disaster and emergency services did a fantastic job during the flooding disaster, but as the shock wears off for flood-affected residents, the exhaustion sets in, and we want them to feel like the reinforcements are arriving, and they certainly are, in the form of Major General Elwood and the ADF support, as you can see here. Of course, as we move into the recovery phase, deeper into the recovery phase, we're determined to build back better. We have had 480 projects funded through betterment funds in recent disasters from 2015, 2017, 2019 and 2021, and no doubt out of this disaster we will have other projects designed to make our buildings and our infrastructure more resilient so that they are less affected by future disasters. We have 17 such flood mitigation projects already developed and ready to go, including one which is an upgrade to our flood disaster warning system. They've all been prioritised by our Queensland Reconstruction Authority, and so we'll continue to work on those as well as developing others out specific to and out of this flood disaster.
Thanks. Might take questions first to myself, Peter, the Deputy Premier or the Recovery Coordinator, Major General Jake Elwood. So
we've heard a lot about flood buybacks, especially today in Toombul. They're talking about 6 months. Some of those properties will be unusable. Is that something the government is further looking at, or is it something considering?
I might get the Deputy Premier to address that. Thanks.
So as I say, we're just doing the disaster assessments now, so it will take some time to work through both assessing the level of damage in those locations and assessing the most appropriate resilience projects there. In the past, we have seen small buybacks where there haven't been alternative options available, but they are expensive and they obviously displace people, and so we will consider all of the appropriate options, including allowing for building alterations, localised levies, other stormwater protection. So there's a range of options that may be most appropriate in each individual circumstance, and we'll consider those based on their experience and on the damage assessment. So we were at roughly 15,000 properties expected to be inundated, but that included all levels of inundation. So, for example, some water through the backyard. So we've now assessed more than 15,000 properties, and I've just outlined for you those that have moderate or severe levels of damage. Others will have had minor or been assessed not to have had damage, and as I say, that's more than that 15,000 number. So the projections were roughly accurate, even though the system itself was hard to predict.
What's the government doing about emergency housing for people who actually need to leave their houses? We've got mould growing up in people's second stories, even if they were only inundated in the first floor.
So the Department of Housing has worked through short-term accommodation options, so that largely involves the use of hotels, and they have leases across a range of hotels in the affected communities. They will then work with individuals to determine more appropriate medium-term options as their accommodation either gets repaired or they find alternatives.
Yeah, and just on that too, it's no different to what we experienced up in Townsville. So in Townsville we were able to source people short-term accommodation, whether that's in hotels. And don't forget now that a lot of our hotels are now free because we're not doing quarantine. And the other issue is we look at hotels that actually are like apartment-based as well for people. So if anyone does have any concerns out there, please stop into one of our community recovery hubs. There's about 18 across the impacted areas, and you can come in there and get assistance about personal hardship funding, but also to help with accommodation, and also there'll be other support agencies there as well. So it's like a one-stop shop. You don't have to feel like you're alone. Go in and stop into one of our community recovery hubs.
Premier, did last night's Four Corners program, the revelations on last night's Four Corners program, did they shock you?
In relation to, sorry,
last night's Four Corners program.
I didn't see it last night, I'm sorry. I've been dealing with other issues.
The contents of the program, what it was about?
Well, you can tell me and I'll comment on it.
Yeah, it was about a young Indigenous girl in Jumaji who presented.
Oh, yes, I have heard about that. And sorry, I've been dealing with all of these matters, as you can appreciate. Yeah, let's keep on floods at the moment, yeah. Yes. Yep. Look, I understand that there's going to be a meeting, the last I heard, between the Lord Mayor and Minister Bailey. I think that meeting's scheduled for tomorrow. But can I tell you, we need a solution for this. It's been sitting there for a long, long time, and it is a bit of an eyesore. So let's work through it and come up with a solution. Well, they're going to work that out tomorrow. Sorry? I've just been told they're having a meeting tomorrow. Okay, so talk to them after the meeting. Yeah.
I saw a comment on your social media saying new recovery coordinator Brendan Moon will guide Queensland as we make our way through. His position was already current, is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, Brendan Moon does a great job. So he reports with the Deputy Premier. So this is our flood recovery. So Brendan Moon's the head of the Reconstruction Authority that goes out and helps with the assessments.
So the new recovery
No. Okay. Anything else?
Oh, back to the Four Corners program.
Yeah, so we finished with flood recovery. Can we let people go? Yep. Yeah. So, okay, look, thank you very much. And look, the Health Minister has also raised this with me. We know that there's been some tragic cases, and our thoughts are with the families of those loved ones. My advice is from the Health Minister that these cases are currently under investigation by the North West Hospital Health Service and the coroner. And as a government, we're leading the nation in tackling rheumatic heart disease. In Australian First, the government launched a dedicated rheumatic heart disease strategy last week, and the strategy is backed by $7.3 million in funding. It includes $2.88 million for specific actions in 10 communities across northern Queensland, including Doomadgee.
Why was the incident report into the girl's death not handed to the family until the ABC?
You'll have to ask the Health Minister. She's happy to talk about these issues today. As you can appreciate, I've got 22 councils that are impacted at the moment, and my focus has been on this. The Health Minister has updated me on the issues that she has done in relation to the strategy, and also too that there's a coroner's investigation afoot. Yeah.
How does this allowed to happen though? Isn't this a national disgrace?
As I said, we're focusing at the moment on this. You can talk to the Health Minister about it. She's more than happy to talk to you about it today. Okay?
Rory, what do you think about Brisbane being shortlisted? Sorry, as a site for New South Wales?
Well, you can talk to the federal.
But what,
No.
what's your opinion as
Talk to
Australia?
Talk to the federal minister. It's nothing. It's federal responsibility.
Do you support it though?
No, federal minister.
Okay. Is there room at the
Do you
Port of
want to
Brisbane?
direct it to me? The Defence Department has looked at sites, and one of the criteria, the essential criteria, I suppose, is the ability to have deep water, so that the subs can submerge very quickly, and then they can go off and do their work. And so they've identified 3 sites. I know the Prime Minister, I think, spoken with the Premier, both of Queensland and Premier of New South Wales as well. But there's a way to go on this. So I think they've shortlisted 3 sites, and then we go through the pros and cons. There are many thousands of jobs that are associated with such a facility. You've got to make judgments about whether there's capacity within a particular port structure to accommodate that additional work. We know when, for example, I think the Premier, myself and others have visited some of the US ships when they've docked in, even in the Brisbane River. On some occasions those ships can spend $1 million a day in the local community. There's an enormous opportunity for industry, for defence industry, and there's the opportunity to replenish stocks and supplies onto vessels. So there are pros and cons that'll be considered, but the 3 sites have been shortlisted, and we'll see how the investigation goes from there.
Have you had any indication of support from the Queensland government?
I haven't, like the Premier, I guess. The last few days we've just been completely focused on the response to the floods and the way in which we can work together, and I'm sure there'll be a sensible, mature conversation about the pros and cons of the 3 sites. I know in New South Wales, I think they're particularly keen around Newcastle because of the jobs that it creates there and the industry that's there already. But again, that's a discussion for the future months and a couple of years ahead. I think it has. I mean, look, I'll make a couple of points. I mean, we have worked very closely, and this is the advice from the Chief of the Defence Force, seamlessly, I might say. You don't always see Premier and I agreeing or eye to eye on every issue, but I think there has been a great level of collaboration and cooperation. Maybe that's because of bitter experience in Queensland with cyclones and floods and natural disasters otherwise. And also I think because of the size of the Brisbane City Council, their capacity to respond, as we're seeing with the Mud Army, and the coordination between the 3 levels of government has been obvious there. It's been more difficult in New South Wales, if I'm being honest, but nobody wants to hear about that. They want to hear about the response, which is what we're concentrating on. So in some instances the ADF has been frustrated because I just think the SES and others who are doing fantastic work have just been overwhelmed by the volume of calls and responses that are required. In some of those instances, my direction to the Chief of the Defence Force is that we should go in and provide that leadership on the ground in those communities, and to respond without waiting for the paperwork and the processes that would normally need to be adhered to. So I think the gravity of what we've seen in northern New South Wales. Frankly, it's not a flood, it's more akin to what we saw in Grantham in 2011. It's a huge surge of water that's come through. I think the assessment of the first 3,000 homes down there in northern New South Wales realised that 2,000 of them were uninhabitable, and that level of destruction and the response to it is not going to happen overnight. I mean, even in Goodna here, as you're driving down, despite the fact that we've had, you know, a massive clean-up and coordinated effort, there's still rubbish on the side of the road, and that will take some time to clear, even when people are working the long hours that they are. And so we're not going to get resolution to the issues in northern New South Wales overnight, but I can promise you I've been very clear to Defence, and that is we will do whatever it takes to help northern New South Wales get back on their feet. And that's true as this cell goes further south towards Sydney. We've pre-positioned people and assets to respond to whatever might happen over the coming hours and couple of days in Sydney. And it's what we've done here in the southeast corner from Gympie, you know, west out through the Somerset and into the suburbs of Brisbane where we are today.
The New South Wales Premier has apologised over the response up there. Obviously there's been instances where there's been no one to go and rescue people from homes. In hindsight, should more ADF resources been sent earlier?
Well, Tim, I think there has been... I'm not critical of the SES in New South Wales. I want to make that very clear. I'm not critical of their emergency, the equivalent of the Queensland Emergency Service, you know, body. But the fact is, I think they are overwhelmed, and I think the local council's in the same situation in Lismore, and I think the mayor's been very frank about that. We had assets and we had people pre-positioned anticipating the floods. That was true in Gympie, it was true in Goodna, it was true in Lismore and west of there as well. And we'll continue to put more in. We rescued 113 people from rooftops, and that was the initial response from the ADF. And we'll continue to put more assets in and more people, and people are being dropped medications, food, water, where normally that would be a state government response. The ADF is providing that response. So I'm not critical of the Australian Defence Force at all, to be honest. I think the work that they've done, the bravery that we've seen, the lives that they've saved, I'm incredibly proud of that, and I'm not critical of it.
Minister, why didn't the federal government fund a priority upgrade of the flood warning infrastructure network?
Well, I'll let you direct that to Minister Mackenzie. I think that's within her area of infrastructure. So, any other questions?
Can we ask you quickly about International Women's Day? What does the day mean to you, and who are you celebrating today?
Well, I'm out here talking to women that have been impacted by the floods, and can I just say that International Women's Day is a day where we can look at women's achievements across the board, and also aim for a society that is equal. And I commend everyone in the workplace that's doing that, and the leadership that women are setting in all fields across government, community and business.
What do you think needs to be done to women better protect women in Queensland?
Look, we've got the Margaret McMurdo looking at a number of issues there, reporting to the government. We've led the way in terms of implementing the recommendations of Quentin Bryce's landmark report into domestic and family violence. There's always more that can be done to ensure that women are safe and free from harassment. I'd like to see more done in relation to the harassment that young girls and women get on social media. It is appalling, and it has a negative impact on their lives, and we've seen the tragic consequences of that. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you.